The impossible ship haunted the mountains like a phantom from another world. No one knew how the massive steel icebreaker had come to rest in the remote glacial valley, thousands of feet above sea level and hundreds of miles from any ocean. Most villagers avoided the rusting hulk, calling it cursed, but 12-year-old Nima had never been like most people. With quiet determination that belied her years, she trudged through knee-deep snow toward the towering vessel, its cracked hull gleaming dully in the winter sun. Her grandfather's stories about the sky ship had always fascinated her, but what truly drove her forward was the flickering light she'd spotted through a porthole last night. Impossible in a vessel abandoned for decades. What ancient secret could be stirring within the frozen tomb of steel and ice? Dawn broke over the jagged peaks, painting the snow in hues of amber and rose. Nima was already awake, perched on the wooden sill of her bedroom window. She held her father's brass compass, thumbing its worn surface where unusual markings circled the cardinal points. Unlike ordinary compasses, this one contained symbols in the margins, strange diagrams and notations her grandfather claimed were meaningless embellishments. Nima knew better. "Nima, the goats need feeding," her grandfather's voice echoed up from below. Tucking the compass into her pocket, she descended the wooden ladder from her loft. Their home was modest, a stone and timber dwelling that had sheltered 5 generations of her family. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, hand-woven tapestries, and her grandfather's collection of odd trinkets gathered over his 83 years. "You were watching the ship again," he said, not a question but a statement. His weathered face remained impassive as he stirred a pot of barley porridge. "The light was there again, grandfather." "Someone is inside." The old man sighed, placing a wooden bowl before her. "That ship has been there since before you were born. There is no light, only reflections, and your imagination." The village of Jiangmu clung to the mountainside like stubborn lichen, 37 stone houses, connected by narrow pathways and wooden bridges spanning small ravines. At 12,000 feet above sea level, the air was thin, the weather harsh, and outsiders rare. Their isolation had preserved ancient traditions and stories passed through generations. Nima hurried through her chores with practiced efficiency. Unlike other children who complained about the daily routine, she found comfort in the rhythm. It left her afternoons free for exploration. Today she needed to prepare for tomorrow's journey to the ship. At the village square, elders gathered to discuss the unusual weather patterns that had disrupted planting schedules. The seasons were shifting, winters longer, summers unpredictable. Many blamed the ship. "The metal beast brings bad fortune," Elder Dory proclaimed as Nima passed. "It disturbs the mountain spirits." Nima kept walking, aware of the stares. Her reputation as an oddity was well established. The quiet girl who climbed too high, wandered too far, asked too many questions. Her grandfather encouraged her curiosity in private, but cautioned discretion among neighbors who viewed difference with suspicion. At the village edge, she found Tenzin repairing fishing nets by the stream. 2 years her senior, he was one of few who didn't treat her like a peculiar artifact. "Planning another adventure?" he asked, without looking up. "Perhaps," she replied, settling beside him. "Have you noticed the weather changing?" Tenzin nodded. "Father says the glaciers are moving differently. Some are retreating while others advance. He found a new crevasse yesterday where solid ice stood last season, and no one connects this to the lights at the ship." He finally met her gaze. "You saw them again?" "Last night, flickering blue, like lightning caught in glass." They sat in silence, the implications hanging between them. Everyone knew the stories, how the ship had appeared 40 years ago, during a terrible storm, thunder that lasted 3 days, a blinding light that turned night to day, and when it cleared, the massive metal vessel was there, embedded in ice, where no ship could possibly be. Many villagers died that year, a terrible sickness that swept through Jiangmu. Nima's grandmother was among them. Some attempted to reach the ship, but returned delirious, speaking nonsense about doors between worlds. Eventually, the village elders forbade anyone from approaching it. 15 years ago, outsiders came, scientists and military men, asking questions, setting up equipment. They stayed for months before disappearing suddenly. Among them were Nima's parents, mountain guides, who joined the expedition and never returned. "Grandfather still won't speak of them," Nima said, skipping a stone across the water. "But I found my father's journal last summer. Pages missing, but what remains mentions the ship, coordinates, calculations. That's why you keep going back." She pulled out the compass, showing him how the needle behaved erratically when pointed toward the ship's location. "Something there affects this, and whatever took my parents might still be there." Tenzin looked troubled. "The elders say 3 children have vanished near that ship over the years. Or perhaps they found a way in, a way to wherever my parents went." Nima stood, brushing dust from her clothes. "Tomorrow I'm going inside again. I found an entrance last time, a cargo door partially open." "Nima, it's dangerous. More dangerous than living with questions, than never knowing." She slipped the compass back into her pocket. "The light means someone's there. Maybe they have answers." As she headed home, storm clouds gathered above the distant peak where the impossible ship rested. The air carried an electric charge, and for a moment, the mountains themselves seemed to hold their breath. Dawn had barely broken when Nima set out, mist still clinging to the valleys below. She had packed lightly dried meat, flatbread, a water skin, matches, and a small knife. The compass hung around her neck beneath her layers. Her grandfather still slept, unaware of her departure. The note she'd left simply stated she'd gone to collect alpine flowers for medicine, a half-truth that wouldn't worry him until evening. The path to the ship didn't exist on any village map. Nima navigated by memory and landmarks. The lightning-struck pine, the boulder shaped like a sleeping bear, the narrow ridge, where winds always howled regardless of weather. The journey would take 4 hours of steady climbing. As she ascended, the vegetation thinned until only the hardiest alpine plants remained, clinging stubbornly to rock faces. The air grew thinner, each breath visible in the cold. Patches of snow appeared, then widened into permanent drifts. By mid-morning, she traversed a field of ice and snow that concealed the glacier beneath. The compass grew warm against her skin, its needle spinning erratically as she approached her destination. Through gaps in the shifting fog, she caught glimpses of the impossible structure, a massive dark shape embedded in white. Then the mist parted, and the ship revealed itself fully. The vessel was enormous, its hull stretching at least 300 feet. Black steel rose from the glacier like a mountain itself, scarred by ice and time. How such a massive structure had come to rest at 18,000 feet, hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean, defied all logic. Nima approached cautiously, studying details that had fascinated her since childhood. The bow was reinforced with massive steel plates, an icebreaker designed to force passage through frozen seas. Now it was the ice that held the ship captive, great glacial arms embracing the hull, claiming it for the mountain. She circled toward the starboard side, where the name should be visible. The lettering had been mostly scoured away by decades of brutal mountain weather, but fragments remained. Horizon EX, and beneath it symbols unlike any alphabet Nima recognized. No flag or identifying markers remained intact, though circular impressions on the hull suggested emblems had once been mounted there. Where had it come from? No nation she knew claimed it. The village elders spoke of its arrival during the Great Storm, as though it had fallen from the sky rather than sailed to this impossible location. As Nima moved closer, she noticed unusual features. Sections of the hull were constructed from materials that didn't match the rest. Darker panels with faint geometric patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Porthole windows lined the upper decks, most cracked or shattered by extreme temperature fluctuation. The frozen doorway loomed before her, a massive cargo entrance partially ajar, creating a narrow gap through which one might squeeze. Ice had formed a crystalline archway around it, hanging in dagger-like formations that caught the midday sun and scattered rainbow light across the snow. Nima hesitated at this threshold, between worlds. Last night's lights suggested someone or something was inside. Was it her parents, somehow surviving all these years? Government researchers returned to reclaim abandoned equipment, or something else entirely. She knelt to examine the snow near the entrance. There, partially obscured by fresh snowfall but unmistakable footprints. Not her own from previous visits. These were larger, with unusual treads unlike any boot worn in her village. Some pattern was stamped into the snow, concentric circles with a central dot. The tracks led both in and out of the ship, some appearing fresher than others. Someone had been coming and going, perhaps for weeks. A sudden gust of wind brought an unusual scent, metallic and sharp, like the air before lightning strikes. The compass grew warmer still, almost uncomfortable against her skin. From deep within the ship came a low vibration, more felt than heard, as though massive machinery stirred beneath layers of ice and steel. Nima studied the half-open cargo door. Ice had claimed much of it, but there was evidence of recent disturbance, tool marks where someone had chipped away the formations to widen the entrance. The gap was just large enough for a person to slip through sideways. She took a deep breath of the thin mountain air, adjusted her pack, and approached the frozen doorway. The metal groaned as wind rushed through the ship's skeletal interior. It almost sounded like a warning, or an invitation. Touching the cold steel of the doorframe, Nima whispered the promise she'd made at her parents' empty memorial, "I will find what happened to you." Then she turned sideways and squeezed through the gap, leaving the familiar world behind. Darkness swallowed Nima as she squeezed through the narrow opening. The temperature dropped immediately, a cold different from the mountain chill, stale and metallic. She stood motionless, allowing her eyes to adjust while listening intently. Water dripped somewhere deeper inside, a rhythmic percussion echoing through hollow chambers. Beneath that, almost imperceptible, came a low hum, mechanical and constant. Nima produced a small flashlight from her pack. The beam revealed a cavernous cargo hold, massive steel ribs arching overhead like the skeleton of some great beast. Frost coated every surface, transforming mundane equipment into glittering sculptures. Crates and containers were scattered about, many split open by expanding ice or tipped over during whatever cataclysm had brought the ship to this impossible resting place. She moved cautiously, testing each step on the icy metal flooring. The air held an unusual quality, not just cold, but charged somehow, making the fine hairs on her arms stand despite her layers. Her breath clouded before her face, briefly illuminated in the flashlight's beam before dissipating. A narrow corridor led deeper into the vessel. Nima followed it, noting signs that suggested a hasty departure, personal items abandoned. A cup still on a small table, frozen liquid captured mid-spill. The people who had crewed this vessel hadn't planned to leave it behind. The corridor opened into what must have been a mess hall. Long tables bolted to the floor were still set with plates and utensils, now frozen in place. In one corner, a large map was mounted to the wall, continents and oceans rendered in faded colors. Nima studied it carefully. The landmasses looked generally familiar, but proportions seemed subtly wrong, coastlines not quite matching her memory of school atlases. Beyond the mess hall, she discovered a steep stairwell leading both up and down. The footprints she'd noticed outside continued here, most heading upward. After a moment's hesitation, Nima followed them. The upper level contained what appeared to be crew quarters, small compartments with bunks built into walls, minimal storage space, personal effects still visible. Some doors hung open, others remained sealed. The sense of abandonment was palpable, as though the inhabitants might return at any moment to reclaim their possessions. At the end of the corridor stood a larger door marked with symbols resembling those on her compass. It was partially ajar. Nima pushed it open with effort, hinges protesting after decades of disuse. The captain's quarters were more spacious than the crew rooms, but still modest. A desk dominated one wall. drawers hanging open and empty. Charts and instruments were scattered across its surface, frozen in time. Above the desk, photographs had been secured to the wall. Crew members in unfamiliar uniforms, standing proudly before the ship when it was new, gleaming in sunlight beside an ocean dock. Nima studied the faces, serious men and women, with military bearing. Their uniforms bore insignias she didn't recognize, not Chinese, not Indian, not American or Russian. Something else entirely. On a hook by the door hung a naval officer's cap, preserved by the cold. Nima carefully lifted it, examining the emblem embroidered on its front, concentric circles around a central star, matching the footprints she'd seen in the snow. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the materials unlike any fabric she'd encountered. It felt almost impossibly light in her hands. Movement caught her eye, her own reflection in a small mirror mounted beside a washing basin. For a moment, with the cap held before her, she looked like she might belong here among the ship's mysteries. A sudden noise from somewhere below, metal striking metal, startled her from this reverie. She wasn't alone. Quickly she tucked the captain's hat into her pack and moved to the navigation station. The charts there displayed no country names she recognized, though the general outline of continental shapes remained familiar. Longitude and latitude markings used a system she couldn't decipher. Strange annotations covered the margins, mathematical formulas perhaps, or something else entirely. Most curious were the instruments. What appeared to be a navigation system featured technology unlike anything in Nima's experience. No radio dials or compass roses, but glass-like panels with embedded circuitry now dark and dormant. She traced her fingers over one panel, wiping away frost. Without warning, it flickered briefly to life, emitting a soft blue glow before fading again. Nima jerked her hand back in surprise. Something about this ship was still active, still powered after all these years. Another sound echoed from below, footsteps this time, deliberate and slow. Nima quickly gathered a few small items, a pencil-like instrument, a folded chart, a small booklet with symbols matching her compass, and slipped them into her pack alongside the hat. The blue glow had been the same hue she'd observed from outside. Someone else was exploring the ship, perhaps activating its dormant systems. Nima needed to see more, understand more, before confronting them. Decision made, she slipped quietly from the captain's quarters toward the stairwell that would take her deeper into the vessel's heart. Stairwell spiraled downward, each metal step groaning softly beneath Nima's weight, despite her lightness. The air grew noticeably warmer as she descended, not comfortable, but less bitter than the frozen upper decks. The persistent hum intensified, vibrating through the handrail against her palm. The lower level opened into a vast chamber that must have occupied most of the ship's midsection. Massive machinery filled the space, purpose unclear but scale impressive. Unlike the abandoned chaos above, this room showed signs of recent disturbance, footprints in the dust, frost scraped from control panels, tools placed with deliberate care on workstations. Nima kept to the shadows, moving cautiously between hulking equipment. Some resembled engines, others were entirely unfamiliar. Arrays of cylindrical chambers connected by a network of pipes and cables. None matched the diesel engines she'd seen in village generators or the steamworks illustrated in her schoolbooks. At the chamber's center stood what appeared to be the primary power plant, a spherical construction housed within a framework of metal supports and surrounded by workstations. Its surface featured intricate patterns that seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles. The sphere emitted the faint blue luminescence she'd spotted from outside, pulsing at irregular intervals like a labored heartbeat. Someone had been studying it. Notes and measuring devices were arranged on nearby surfaces, paper weighted down with small metal tools. Nima approached cautiously, examining the papers without touching them. The handwriting was precise but unfamiliar, the language unlike any she'd seen, certainly not Chinese or Tibetan or English. On a side table lay a leather-bound book, clearly a ship's logbook based on its resemblance to those in her grandfather's stories. Unlike the loose notes, this was an original artifact from the vessel's crew. Nima carefully opened it, finding pages filled with the same incomprehensible script. Diagrams populated the margins, astronomical calculations perhaps, or navigational charts using reference points she couldn't identify. What captured her attention were coordinates noted throughout the text. While the numbering system was unfamiliar, the format was recognizable. Latitude and longitude perhaps, but calibrated to different reference points. Some entries were accompanied by sketches of landscapes that triggered a shock of recognition. Mountain ranges she knew, valleys where her village now stood, but rendered as they might have appeared decades earlier. This ship had been specifically seeking these mountains. Its presence was no accident. Nima pulled out her father's compass, comparing its unusual markings to symbols in the logbook. The similarities were unmistakable, the same concentric patterns, the angular script around the margin. The compass wasn't merely similar to the ship's navigational instruments. It had been modeled after them. How had her father acquired it? Had he taken it during those months he'd spent with the research team 15 years ago? Or had it been given to him by someone who understood its significance? A page near the logbook's end contained entries that differed from earlier ones, hurried, the script less precise, ink blotted in places. Something had happened, something that disturbed the methodical recorder. The final entry was underlined multiple times, followed by what appeared to be a warning or alert symbol. Tucking the logbook into her pack alongside the captain's hat, Nima continued exploring. Beyond the engine room lay smaller chambers, laboratories filled with equipment both recognizable and alien. Microscopes sat beside devices with no clear purpose. Glass containers held preserved specimens, plant matter mostly, some recognizable as alpine species from these very mountains. In one lab, a chart on the wall mapped what appeared to be energy readings across the mountain range, concentrated at the ship's current location. The pattern matched disturbances her father had documented in his own journal, anomalies in compass readings, unexplained atmospheric phenomena, animals behaving strangely. A sudden scraping sound from the engine room froze her in place. Someone was moving between the machines, approaching her position. Nima quickly ducked behind a workstation, dimming her flashlight to the barest glow. Through a gap beneath a console she glimpsed boots passing slowly by, heavy-soled with the distinctive circular pattern she'd seen in the snow. The footsteps paused near where she'd examined the logbook, followed by a sharp exclamation in an unfamiliar language. They'd noticed the missing book. Nima remained motionless, barely breathing. The figure moved with purpose now, checking each adjacent room. She caught only glimpses: dark clothing, tall stature, methodical movements of someone conducting a systematic search. When the footsteps temporarily receded, Nima seized her chance. Staying low, she slipped toward an emergency ladder she'd spotted earlier, leading to a maintenance tunnel. As she climbed, a shout echoed from below. She'd been spotted. Pushing through a hatch, she emerged on a different level entirely and ran blindly down an unfamiliar corridor, heart pounding in time with her footsteps on the metal deck. The mountain light was fading when Nima finally squeezed back through the cargo door entrance, her heart still racing from the narrow escape. Once outside, she didn't pause to catch her breath, but immediately began descending, taking a different route than her approach, steeper and more treacherous, but less exposed to anyone who might follow. The weather had shifted dramatically during her hours inside. Dark clouds now shrouded the peaks, and the wind carried the unmistakable scent of approaching snow. Such sudden changes weren't unusual at this altitude, but the timing felt deliberate, as though the mountain itself was responding to her intrusion into the ship's secrets. Halfway down the glacier, the storm struck in earnest. Snow fell in thick, disorienting curtains, reducing visibility to mere steps ahead. The temperature plummeted as daylight faded entirely. Nima's experience in these mountains had taught her the danger of such conditions. Even lifelong residents could become lost and perish within minutes of losing their bearings. She paused beneath a rocky overhang, extracting her father's compass from beneath her layers. Its needle swung erratically before suddenly steadying, pointing not north, but directly toward her village. Impossible, yet as she followed its direction, familiar landmarks emerged from the blinding snow, exactly where the compass suggested they would be. It was nearly midnight when Nima finally stumbled into the village, exhausted and half-frozen. Lights still burned in her grandfather's house. He'd waited up, worried by her extended absence. His relief at seeing her quickly transformed to stern concern as he took in her condition. "The ship," he stated flatly, helping her remove her ice-crusted outer garments. "After everything I've told you," Nima nodded, too tired to deny it. "I found things, grandfather, things that might explain what happened to them." The old man's expression hard. Nothing good comes from disturbing what should remain buried. Nevertheless, he stoked the fire higher and placed a steaming cup of butter tea in her hands. Once warmth had returned to her limbs, Nima carefully unpacked her findings: the captain's hat, the strange logbook, and most significantly, a photograph she'd taken from a drawer in the lab. She placed this last item on the table between them. The faded Polaroid showed a team of people standing proudly before the ship when it was new. Unlike the official crew photos, this group wore civilian clothes, researchers or scientists rather than naval personnel. The date stamped in the corner read June 17, 1962, decades before the ship supposedly appeared in the mountains. Her grandfather's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the photograph. His weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes lingered on one figure in particular, a young woman standing slightly apart from the others, her expression serious beneath a shock of dark hair. "You recognize someone?" Nima said softly. The old man remained silent for a long moment. "Where did you find this?" "In a laboratory on the lower deck." "There were others, but this one..." She hesitated. "This one had writing on the back." He turned it over. In faded ink, someone had written Project Horizon Team. First phase complete. Crossing scheduled for August. "The woman," Nima prompted gently. "Who is she?" Her grandfather set the photo down carefully, as though it might shatter. "My sister, your great-aunt Pema, the one who disappeared during the Great Storm." When the ship came, he nodded once, eyes fixed on the image. "She was not simply lost in the storm, as I allowed everyone to believe. She was working with these people. She was a mathematician, brilliant, educated in Beijing. They recruited her for calculations, star charts, navigational equations. But this photo, the date, is impossible," he finished. "The ship appeared in 1985. This photograph was taken 23 years earlier." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the howling wind outside. "There's more," Nima said finally. "Someone else is exploring the ship. Someone who knows what they're looking for." She described the sphere in the engine room, the notes, the methodical search pattern of the stranger she'd encountered. Her grandfather listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When she mentioned the symbols in the logbook, matching those on her father's compass, he abruptly stood and crossed to an old trunk in the corner. After a moment's hesitation, he produced a key from around his neck and unlocked it. "I should have shown you this years ago," he said, returning with a slim leather journal. "Your father's research notes. Not all of them. Many pages are missing. But what remains might help you understand what you found. You told me all his papers were lost. I told you what I thought would keep you safe." The old man looked suddenly every one of his 83 years. But perhaps safety is no longer possible. Not if someone has reactivated the ship's systems. Morning arrived with clear skies bellying the previous night's tempest. Nima had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with impossible ships and strangers moving through darkened corridors. She woke to find her grandfather already gone, his bed neatly made, A note on the table indicated he'd gone to consult with Elder Dorje and would return by midday. This absence provided the opportunity Nima needed. Despite his revelations last night, she sensed her grandfather still withheld crucial information. The village must hold more answers. She began with Jamyang, the oldest resident of Jiang. At 96, his memories stretched further back than anyone's, though recent events often eluded him. Nima found him in his customary spot, a stone bench facing the mountains, weathered hands working prayer beads with practiced rhythm. "Ah, the curious child," he greeted her without turning. "Come to ask about the sky fire again?" Nima settled beside him. "You're the only one who still calls it that." Because that's what it was. His clouded eyes remained fixed on the distant peaks. Not a storm as others claim. Something tore open above these mountains. The sky itself split like fabric, edges burning with light no human was meant to witness. And the ship came through this tear. The old man's fingers paused on his beads. Not just the ship, other things too. Things we don't speak of. Nima produced the photograph, holding it where Jamyang could see with his limited vision. This was taken 23 years before the ship appeared here. How is that possible? He squinted at the image. Time moves differently near the tear. Your great-aunt understood this. She tried to explain it to us, how past and future might exist simultaneously, how passage between them could be calculated, navigated. You knew her, my great-aunt Pima. I recommended her for the project. His admission carried the weight of long-held regret. When the outsiders came seeking someone who understood both mathematics and these mountains, I directed them to her. She was wasted here, her brilliance confined to teaching village children basic arithmetic. This revelation struck Nima like a physical blow. What exactly was this project? They called it Horizon. Beyond that, Pima shared little. Equations, energy readings, astronomical alignments, these meant nothing to a simple man like me. But I understood enough to know they were attempting something profoundly dangerous. Nima pressed further, but Jamyang retreated into vague recollections and eventually dozed in the warming sun. She left him to his rest and proceeded to the village records, housed in a small stone building adjacent to the community hall. Access to these archives was typically restricted to elders and record keepers, but the current keeper, Lemmo, had always shown Nima unusual leniency. Today was no exception. After minimal questioning about her interest in historical weather patterns, Lemmo allowed her entry, returning to her weaving outside. The records room smelled of dust and aging paper. Wooden shelves held leather-bound volumes, birth and death registries, harvest records, significant events carefully documented for generations. Nima bypassed recent histories, focusing instead on the section covering 90. Several volumes appeared to have been accessed recently, bindings less dusty, slight disarrangement from the otherwise meticulous order. The period immediately surrounding the arrival held conspicuous gaps, entire months missing, pages clearly removed. Someone had systematically expunged official records of whatever had truly occurred. But village record keepers were thorough by nature and tradition. If information was removed from the main archives, duplicates might exist elsewhere. Behind the primary shelving, Nima discovered a smaller cabinet, its lock long broken. Inside lay miscellaneous documents, maps, letters, loose pages apparently deemed less important. Among these she found a hand-drawn map of the valley from approximately 40 years ago. Unlike official maps, this one contained notations in the margins, coordinates matching those in the ship's logbook. Most significantly, it showed the valley before the ship's appearance, with the location where the vessel now rested, marked by a series of concentric circles and a notation, predicted convergence point. Someone had anticipated the ship's arrival, had calculated its precise location years in advance. Tucked within the same folder was a thin sheaf of papers, what appeared to be meeting minutes from the village council. Most contained mundane matters, but one dated just weeks before the arrival mentioned preparations for the project culmination and precautionary evacuations of the upper pastures. The council had known something was coming, had participated in whatever experiment or project had brought the ship to their mountains. As Nima carefully photographed these documents with her small camera, footsteps approached the archives. She quickly returned the materials to their hiding place and pretended to study weather records as Elder Dorji entered, her grandfather following closely behind. "I thought I might find you here," her grandfather said, expression unreadable. Elder Dorji surveyed the room with suspicious eyes, curious how the young always seek answers in the past, when they should be looking to the future. "Sometimes," Nima replied carefully, "the past and future are more connected than we realize." The elder's gaze sharpened. "You sound like your parents, and like them you may discover that some doors, once opened, cannot be easily closed." 3 days passed before Nima could prepare for a return to the ship. Elder Dorji had assigned her community tasks, clearly an attempt to keep her occupied and within the village boundary. Her grandfather remained unusually silent on the matter, though she caught him watching her with an expression that mingled worry and resignation. During evenings, Nima studied her father's journal alongside the ship's logbook. Though written in different languages, the diagrams showed striking similarities: energy patterns, coordinate systems, astronomical charts. Most pages in her father's journal had been torn out, leaving tantalizing fragments of a larger narrative. One remaining notation particularly troubled her. "The convergence is becoming unstable. If calculations are correct, we may face a secondary event within 20 years. Almost exactly 15 years had passed since her parents' disappearance. On the 4th morning before dawn, Nima began packing supplies methodically into a weatherproof rucksack, the supply pack her father had used during his own expeditions. Unlike her previous improvised excursion, this journey would be properly equipped. Food for 3 days, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, extra batteries, a small camera, rope, and most importantly, proper documentation tools, notebooks, pencils, measuring tape, and a small audio recorder salvaged from her parents' belongings. As she worked by lamplight, a soft knock came at her window. Tenzin's face appeared, concern evident even in the dim light. "You're going back," he said as she let him in. "Not a question. There's more to discover. Someone else is investigating the ship, activating dormant systems. I need to understand why. The village is talking. Elder Dorje told the council about your questions, your interest in the old records." Nima continued packing. "Let them talk. They're saying you'll disappear like the others. Like Wang Mo and Pemba 10 years ago. Like your parents." He hesitated. "Some say the ship takes people." She paused, looking up at him. "Do you believe that?" "I believe something extraordinary happened in these mountains, something beyond normal understanding. And I believe you shouldn't face it alone." He straightened his shoulders. "I'm coming with you." Nima started to protest, but recognized the determination in his stance. Tenzin was right. A second set of eyes and hands would be valuable, especially if she encountered the stranger again. Moreover, he was skilled with mechanical systems, having maintained the village's small hydroelectric generator for years. "We leave now, before full light. Pack only essential." Within 30 minutes, they were ascending the lower slopes, taking a more circuitous route to avoid being spotted from the village. The weather was clear but unusually cold for the season. Frost-coated rock faces that should have begun thawing, and ice formations had expanded rather than receded. "The weather patterns have been strange all year," Tenzin noted as they navigated an icy passage. "Elder Samtun says the animals are behaving oddly too, migrating at wrong times, or not at all." By midday, they had reached a plateau, offering their first view of the upper valley where the ship rested. What they saw stopped them in their tracks. Above the vessel, the sky itself seemed distorted, light bending unnaturally, colors shifting through spectra not typically visible in normal auroras. The phenomenon pulsed in rhythm with a low vibration they could feel through the soles of their boots. "That's new," Nima whispered. As they watched, the aerial display intensified. Ribbons of energy spiraled downward, connecting with the ship's highest points. The entire structure briefly illuminated from within, steel hull momentarily transparent, as though transformed to glass. "It's activating," Tenzin breathed. "But how?" After all these years, they continued their approach with increased caution, reaching the final ridge by late afternoon. From this vantage point, they could observe the entrance without exposing themselves. What they saw confirmed Nima's suspicions. Fresh equipment had been installed near the cargo door. Sensitive instruments on tripods, cables running inside, a small generator humming quietly. Someone had established a research station. "We should wait for darkness," Tenzin suggested. "Observe who's operating this equipment." They set up a rudimentary camp in a sheltered hollow, taking turns watching through binoculars as daylight faded. The aerial phenomenon intensified with nightfall, casting eerie illumination across the snowfield. Shortly after dusk, a figure emerged from the ship, tall, moving with precise efficiency, checking instruments and making adjustments before returning inside. "Did you see their face?" Nima asked. Tenzin shook his head. "They wore some kind of protective mask, but their equipment is advanced, nothing like what's available in regional cities, not even in Beijing." As full night descended, the atmospheric display reached new intensity. Curtains of light cascaded around the ship, their edges crystallizing momentarily into geometric patterns before dissolving. The air itself seemed charged, raising the hair on their arms despite layers of clothing. "Whatever they're doing in there," Tenzin said quietly, "they're affecting the boundary between the ship and something else." Nima checked her father's compass. The needle now spun continuously, as though unable to locate any fixed reference point. "We go in at first light," she decided. When the aurora fades, dawn brought temporary respite from the aerial phenomenon. The sky above the ship appeared normal again, though thin wisps of unusual luminescence occasionally spiraled upward from the vessel's highest points. Nima and Tenzin approached cautiously, alert for any sign of the mysterious researcher. The equipment outside remained unattended. Tenzin examined it with quiet admiration. Atmospheric sensors, electromagnetic field readers, he identified. "Careful not to touch anything. This is university-level research equipment. Maybe military." The cargo door entrance Nima had used previously was now completely clear of ice, deliberately melted away to provide easier access. Inside, the temperature had noticeably increased since her last visit. The perpetual frost coating internal surfaces had receded in many areas, revealing more details of the ship's construction. "We need to establish a base," Nima whispered, though no sound suggested anyone was nearby. "Somewhere defensible, with good visibility and multiple exit routes." They found a suitable location on the second deck, a small communications room with 2 entrances and a functioning door that could be secured from inside. The room contained banks of equipment whose purpose they could only guess at, but the layout provided natural cover and observation points. "We'll work in alternating patterns," Nima suggested as they arranged their supplies. "One explores while one remains at base. 30-minute rotations, with check-ins using these." She produced 2 small walkie-talkies from her pack, old but functional, with a range sufficient for inside the ship. Tenzin nodded, examining the strange footprints visible in formerly frosted surfaces throughout the corridors. The distinctive tread pattern, concentric circles with a central dot, appeared everywhere, sometimes overlapping, suggesting repeated journeys along the same routes. "They're mapping the ship systematically," he observed. "Look how the tracks concentrate at junctions, then branch out. They're creating a comprehensive survey." While Tenzin remained at their improvised base, Nima conducted the first exploration round, following the mysterious researcher's most frequently used path. The tracks led consistently toward the lower decks, where she'd previously discovered the engine room, with its strange spherical power source. The engine room itself had been transformed. What was previously dark and dormant now hummed with activity. The central sphere glowed steadily, its surface patterns shifting in hypnotic sequences. Around it, previously dead consoles now displayed scrolling information in the same unfamiliar script as the logbook. Most striking were the modifications, modern equipment, interfaced with the ship's ancient systems through a network of cables and adapters. Someone had managed to communicate with technology that should be incompatible with any existing system. Nima photographed everything meticulously before returning to base. As Tenzin departed for his exploration round, she examined the images, comparing symbols on the active displays with those in her father's journal fragments. The similarities were undeniable. Whoever was reactivating the ship understood its language and operational principles. 3 rotation cycles later, they had mapped much of the accessible vessel. The mysterious researcher remained unseen, though fresh evidence of their activity appeared in previously unexplored sections. They must be resting somewhere aboard, perhaps in the crew quarters Nima had discovered on her first visit. During Tenzin's 4th exploration round, the walkie-talkie crackled urgently. "Nima," his voice came through in a tense whisper. "Deck 4, laboratory section. I've found something, come quickly." She found him in a room she hadn't entered before, a laboratory containing equipment specifically designed for biological research. Tenzin stood before a wall covered in photographs, documents and maps, all connected by strings in an analyst's web of relationships. "They've been tracking people," he said quietly. "Look." The display contained photographs of villagers, current residents and those long gone. Nima's parents featured prominently, their images connected to equations and data points. Most disturbing were pictures of children who had disappeared over the years, including Wangmo and Pemba, last seen near the ship a decade ago. "What is this?" Nima breathed, recognizing faces from her own childhood. "I think they're identifying genetic patterns," Tenzin said, pointing to DNA sequence readouts attached to several images, looking for specific markers or traits. A separate section of the wall focused on the atmospheric phenomena, tracking intensification patterns over 15 years. The most recent readings were circled emphatically, with a notation, "Convergence threshold approaching." As they studied the disturbing display, a sound from the corridor froze them in place. Footsteps with the now familiar pattern of concentric circles. The mysterious researcher was returning. Nima quickly surveyed the room for escape routes. A ventilation duct might accommodate them, but reaching it would require moving into view of the doorway. The only other exit led deeper into unknown sections of the ship. The footsteps grew louder. A decision was necessary. "This way," Nima whispered, pulling Tenzin toward the second door. Better to venture into unknown territory than to be trapped or confronted directly. They slipped through the doorway as the footsteps reached the laboratory entrance. Through a narrow gap, Nima caught a glimpse of their quarry, tall, wearing a form-fitting environmental suit, unlike any standard research gear. The helmet obscured all facial features behind a reflective visor. The figure paused, head tilting slightly as though sensing something amiss. A gloved hand reached toward an instrument at their belt, perhaps a weapon, perhaps a communication device. Nima and Tenzin retreated silently down the unknown corridor, moving deeper into the ship's mysterious heart. The corridor narrowed as they fled deeper into unknown territory. Emergency lighting cast everything in a pale blue glow, shadows stretching like grasping fingers across curved walls. Behind them the footsteps paused, then resumed with deliberate purpose, following, tracking, hunting. "In here," Tenzin whispered, pulling Nima into a narrow maintenance shaft, barely visible in the dim light. They pressed themselves against cold metal, breathing shallow and silent as the footsteps approached. The shaft offered minimal concealment if the pursuer glanced in their direction with any care. Discovery was inevitable. The footsteps slowed directly outside their hiding place. A shadow fell across the entrance. Nima clutched her father's compass tightly, its familiar weight offering small comfort in this moment of certain discovery. Then something unexpected happened. The compass grew warm against her palm, its needle spinning rapidly before pointing directly at the figure outside. Simultaneously, a device on the pursuer's belt emitted a soft, pulsing tone. The helmeted head tilted toward the sound, then toward their hiding place. "You can come out," a voice called, male, accented but fluent in Mandarin. "I've been wondering when local curiosity would bring someone aboard. I'm rather surprised it took this long." After a tense moment, Nima stepped cautiously from concealment, motioning for Tenzin to remain hidden in case retreat became necessary. The figure stood relaxed, helmet now removed, to reveal a middle-aged man with silver-streaked, dark hair and features, suggesting mixed heritage, perhaps European and East Asian. "My name is Dr. Emerson," he said, offering no hand to shake, maintaining careful distance. "And based on that compass you're holding, I suspect you're related to Lin Tashi or Mei Norbu." The mention of her parents' names startled Nima. "They were my parents. How did you—" "The compass is rather distinctive," he interrupted, gesturing toward it. "Custom made for the original research team." Tashi was quite protective of his. His gaze sharpened. "You have his journal as well, I imagine. And you've been inside the ship before." Took the logbook from the engine room. Nima said nothing, evaluating the man before her. Despite his conversational tone, something felt carefully measured in his revelations, offering information to gain trust while concealing more than he shared. "You're Nima, then? The daughter?" His expression softened slightly. "They spoke of you often during the project. You were very young. What happened to them?" The question escaped before she could consider strategy. Dr. Emerson sighed. "That's complicated, and not a discussion for a maintenance corridor." He gestured down the hallway. "My research station is more comfortable. Your friend can join us too." He nodded toward the maintenance shaft, where Tenzin remained partially concealed. The walk to Emerson's quarters was tense with unasked questions. He had transformed a section of crew quarters into a livable space, portable heating equipment, modern lighting, even a small electric kettle for preparing tea. Scientific instruments shared space with personal items, books, photographs, a small music player. "You've been here for months," Tenzin observed, noting the established nature of the camp. "On and off for years. Actually," Emerson corrected, producing 3 metal cups. "More consistently as the convergence approaches." "The convergence," Nima repeated. "You mean the atmospheric phenomena, a symptom, not the cause." He poured tea for each of them. "What do you know about quantum field displacement?" Neither responded, and Emerson nodded, as though their silence confirmed something. "Your parents were brilliant," he continued, "particularly your mother. Her mathematical modeling of dimensional boundaries was revolutionary, the theoretical framework that made Project Horizon possible." He removed an ID badge from a case on his desk, sliding it across to Nima. The laminated card displayed his photo, name, and the project title, Horizon Initiative, Rise to Recovery Operation. Security clearance markings and government codes bordered the text, though no specific agency or country was identified. "This was never a conventional research vessel," Emerson explained, watching their reactions carefully. "The Horizon was designed for a very specific experiment, an attempt to breach the barriers between dimensions." "That's impossible," Tenzin objected. "Evidently not," Emerson replied dryly, gesturing around them. "This ship was built it disappeared during a controlled experiment in 1963. It appeared in these mountains in 1985, having traversed both space and time through a breach that never fully closed. The village elders called it Skyfire," Nima said quietly. Emerson nodded, an apt description of a quantum field collapse. "The experiment created a temporary bridge between points in space-time. The ship crossed through, but became trapped when the field destabilized. And my parents," Nima pressed. "They joined our recovery team 15 years ago. We've been monitoring the breach, waiting for conditions that might allow for a controlled reopening." He hesitated. "They were on board during a preliminary test, When we detected fluctuations in the field, there was an unexpected energy surge. They were lost, dead, Tenzin asked bluntly. Missing, Emerson corrected. The data suggests they were displaced, much like the ship itself was originally. Where or when they might have emerged, we couldn't determine. Silence stretched between them as Nima absorbed Emerson's words. Not dead, missing. The distinction opened possibilities she had long abandoned. You believe they might still be alive, she finally said. Somewhere. Emerson's expression remained carefully neutral. Quantum displacement doesn't necessarily cause harm to organic matter. The ship's original crew survived their transition, though they emerged decades later than expected. Your parents' displacement was different, less controlled, and you've been trying to find them ever since. For 15 years, Tenzin asked skeptically. My interests are scientific, Emerson replied. But yes, locating any displaced personnel remains a secondary objective. The primary mission is understanding how the breach works and potentially harnessing it. For what purpose? Nima pressed. Emerson studied her before responding. That depends on who you ask. My superiors see military applications, instantaneous troop deployment, untraceable transportation of materials. Others envision commercial possibilities, shipping without infrastructure, resource extraction from parallel versions of our world. He stood, gathering empty teacups. Personally, I'm more interested in the theoretical implications. Controllable movement between dimensional planes would revolutionize our understanding of physics. You said the breach never fully closed, Tenzin noted. Is that why the atmospheric phenomena are increasing? Perceptive, Emerson nodded. The breach has cycled through periods of relative dormancy and activity. Recently, the cycles have shortened while intensity has increased. We're approaching another convergence point, a moment when the barriers between dimensions grow particularly thin. Nima thought of her father's journal. If calculations are correct, we may face a secondary event within 20 years. Almost exactly 15 years had passed. What happens during convergence? She asked. Emerson hesitated. That's better demonstrated than explained. Would you like to see the engine room? The true one, not the conventional propulsion system you found earlier. They followed him through a series of corridors Nima hadn't explored during her previous visits, descending via a specialized elevator platform to a level deep within the ship's hull. Security measures grew increasingly evident. Reinforced doors, scanning systems, airlock-style compartments. Though now dormant, these would have once required high-level clearance to navigate. The horizon wasn't merely an icebreaker, Emerson explained as they passed through the final security door. That was its cover identity. Its true purpose was to position the core at precise coordinates where dimensional barriers were calculated to be thinnest. The chamber beyond dwarfed the conventional engine room above. At its center, suspended within a complex framework of supports and instruments, hovered a spherical object, approximately 3 meters in diameter. Unlike the metallic sphere Nima had glimpsed earlier, this one appeared to be composed of pure energy, a swirling, pulsating mass of light, contained within an invisible boundary. Colors shifted across its surface in patterns that hurt the eyes if observed too directly. The core, Emerson announced with undisguised reverence. The only successfully manufactured quantum bridge in human history. The sphere emitted no heat, yet Nima felt warmth radiating from it. The air around the core appeared distorted, light bending unnaturally as though passing through water. What's it made of? Tenzin asked, circling the containment area with obvious fascination. That's not exactly the right question, Emerson replied. It's not made of anything in the conventional sense. It's a localized disruption in quantum fields, stabilized within a containment matrix. Essentially, it's a tier in reality that's been carefully shaped and maintained. He guided them to a control station, where modern equipment interfaced with the ship's original systems. Displays showed readings in both the ship's unusual script and contemporary scientific notation. The original experiment was meant to create a temporary opening, just long enough for short-range testing, but something went wrong. The core became self-sustaining, drawing energy from the dimensional boundary itself. When the ship attempted to disengage, the core pulled it through instead. Emerson activated a sequence on the control panel. The core's pulsations synchronized, colors stabilizing into a steady blue glow. Above it, a holographic display materialized, showing what appeared to be a map of intersecting planes. These represent dimensional boundaries, he explained. The fluctuations you've observed, weather anomalies, aurora-like phenomena, occur when these boundaries overlap more completely. He indicated a point where multiple planes converged. We're approaching a maximum convergence point. When reached, the barriers will be at their thinnest. Theoretical models suggest a complete breach may occur spontaneously. What happens then? Nima asked. Unknown, Emerson admitted, but the energy readings preceding your parents' disappearance were similar to what we're detecting now, just on a smaller scale. That's why I've intensified monitoring. The core suddenly pulsed brighter, its surface patterns accelerating. Instruments around the chamber responded with warning tones. Another fluctuation, Emerson noted. Adjusting controls. They're coming more frequently now. As if responding to his words, the ship trembled slightly. The core's illumination intensified, casting their shadows in sharp relief against the chamber walls. How long until maximum convergence? Tenzin asked, steadying himself against a console. Emerson's expression grew grave. At the current acceleration rate, less than 48 hours. They returned to Emerson's research station, the scientists' earlier confidence now tempered with visible concern. The ship had trembled twice more during their ascent from the core chamber, each vibration accompanied by fluctuations in lighting and brief disorientation that left them grasping for support. The convergence is accelerating, Emerson muttered, reviewing data on a portable computer. Energy signatures are compounding exponentially rather than linearly. You didn't anticipate this, Nima observed. Not a question. The models suggested a gradual approach to maximum convergence. This acceleration indicates something is catalyzing the process. He glanced at her with newfound speculation. When exactly did you first enter the ship? 4 days ago, and you touched equipment, activated systems, nothing intentional. A navigation panel responded briefly when I wiped away frost. Emerson's expression shifted to one of dawning comprehension. Let me see that compass again. Nima hesitated before retrieving it from her pocket. Emerson didn't touch it, but scanned it with a handheld device. As I suspected, he murmured. It's carrying a quantum signature identical to components in the core. Your father must have taken it from the control systems during their final experiment. Why would he do that? Tenzin asked. Insurance, perhaps. Or a backup plan. Emerson's gaze returned to Nima. The core responds to specific quantum harmonics. Having a tuned component might allow for certain contingencies. Nima's patience thinned. Stop speaking in theoretical abstractions. What aren't you telling me about my parents? The scientist sighed, making a decision. From a locked case beneath his workstation, he retrieved a leather-bound book. Her father's journal, intact, with no missing pages. We recovered this after the incident. Most was deemed classified, but I kept a copy. He placed it on the table between them. Your parents weren't simply hired consultants, Nima. They were central to the recovery operation's breakthrough. She opened the journal with trembling fingers. Pages she'd never seen revealed her father's elegant script, detailing theories and calculations related to dimensional resonance patterns and genetic markers for cross-boundary traversal. We discovered something unexpected about the original crew's experience, Emerson continued as she read. Not everyone could pass through the breach safely. Those who survived showed specific genetic markers, subtle mutations allowing their molecular structure to remain stable during transition. Nima found pages containing genetic analyses, including her family's bloodline traced back generations. Your mother theorized that mountain populations with ancestry in this specific region might have been exposed to trace elements of quantum radiation for centuries. The breach didn't begin with our experiment. It was always here, just dormant, occasionally active enough to affect local genetics. The village stories, Nima whispered, people disappearing during strange storms, mysterious lights in the mountains. Precisely, your ancestors weren't simply recording superstitions, they were documenting actual dimensional fluctuations. Your great-aunt Pema recognized the mathematical patterns in old village records, which is why we recruited her originally. Tenzin, who had been examining equipment while they talked, called out suddenly, "There's something here." He'd discovered a hidden panel in the wall, revealed when vibrations had shifted a mounted monitor. Beyond lay a small alcove containing a sealed, transparent case. Inside rested several journals identical to the one Nima now held. Those belonged to the others, Emerson admitted reluctantly. The children who disappeared near the ship over the years. They found their way inside just as you did. The ship responded to them. Responded how? Nima demanded. The core activates differently in the presence of compatible genetic patterns. We've been studying this phenomenon, trying to understand the selection mechanism. You've been using them as test subjects, Tenzin accused. Watching to see which village children the ship would react to. Observing, not directing, Emerson corrected defensively. We needed to understand the pattern before attempting any controlled experiments. And my parents? Were they just part of your experiment too? Emerson hesitated. Your parents volunteered for the final test. We had established theoretical parameters for stable transition, but needed practical confirmation. They believed they could navigate the breach and return safely, using the core's affinity for their genetic signature as an anchor point. He tapped a specific page in the journal. Your father's final calculations indicated a resonance loop could be established, essentially creating a tether to our dimension that would allow for controlled return transit. The compass was designed as a physical component of that tether. Nima found the relevant passage. The resonance tether requires both a mechanical anchor and a biological connection. Blood calls to blood across the dimensional boundary. With properly tuned instruments, we should be able to locate the signal regardless of displacement distance. The compass was never meant for navigation, she realized. It was designed to find them if something went wrong. Not just find them, Emerson corrected quietly. Guide them home, but it required both components, the device itself and someone sharing their genetic signature to activate it. Someone like their daughter, Tenzin concluded. Nima closed the journal carefully. That's why the core's activity accelerated when I entered the ship. It recognized me as the missing component in the equation. Emerson nodded. Your presence has been catalyzing the convergence. The ship is essentially trying to complete the interrupted experiment your parents began. Can we use this to find them? Theoretically, but the uncontrolled acceleration has introduced significant risk. We're approaching a complete breach rather than the targeted window they designed. Another tremor shook the ship, stronger than before. Lights flickered momentarily as distant sounds of metal stress echoed through corridors. We're running out of time to decide, Emerson said. The convergence is coming whether we're ready or not. The ship's tremors increased in both frequency and intensity over the following hours. Emerson worked frantically at his monitoring equipment, muttering calculations and adjusting parameters as readings spiraled beyond predicted values. We need to stabilize the core, he announced finally. The convergence is approaching critical threshold faster than anticipated. At this rate, we have less than 12 hours before complete boundary collapse. What happens then? Tenzin asked. Theoretically, a cascading quantum event that could expand the breach exponentially. Emerson's clinical tone didn't mask the gravity of his words. The dimensional tear could encompass the entire mountain range, possibly more. The village? Nima breathed. would be the first affected, yes. Whether that means destruction or displacement is unknown. The mathematics suggest the latter, but he let the implications hang unspoken. How do we stabilize it? Nima demanded. There's a containment protocol built into the core's original design, a fail-safe the original scientists created in case the experiment exceeded parameters. Emerson gathered portable equipment, packing it methodically. It would essentially reset the core to dormant state, closing the active breach. But that would seal the dimensional boundary. Nima realized, if my parents are on the other side, they would remain there, yes, permanently. Emerson's expression held genuine regret. I understand your position, Nima, but we're talking about the potential displacement of your entire village, hundreds of lives against the slim possibility that your parents still survive on the other side. Another violent shudder ran through the ship, this one lasting longer. Lighting failed momentarily before emergency systems engaged. Time is critical, Emerson insisted. The containment protocol requires specific components stored in the ship's most secure section. He led them deeper into the vessel, through corridors showing increasing signs of the mounting quantum disturbance. In some sections, metal surfaces appeared partially transparent or shifted colors as they passed. Occasional objects, tools, equipment pieces, floated briefly before returning to normal gravitational behavior. They reached a heavily reinforced door unlike others in the ship, thicker with multiple locking mechanisms and warning symbols emblazoned across its surface. The vault, Emerson explained, working on the complex locking system. The original research team stored their most sensitive materials here, experimental data, prototyped components, contingency resources. The massive door opened with surprising smoothness despite decades of disuse. Beyond lay a chamber, unlike any other section of the ship. While most areas showed utilitarian design focused on function, this room featured almost ceremonial precision in its layout. Recessed lighting illuminated pedestals and display cases containing objects of apparent significance. These were the first successful quantum-entangled components, Emerson narrated as they entered, gesturing to devices under glass. Prototypes that led to the core's development. The vault's center featured a raised platform supporting a cylindrical container, approximately 1 meter in height. Unlike other artifacts displayed openly, this one remained sealed within multiple containment layers, mechanical locks, electronic systems, and what appeared to be biometric scanners. The containment protocol initiator, Emerson identified it, designed to interface directly with the core, forcing a controlled collapse of the quantum field. He approached a nearby console, entering a complex sequence. The original team required multiple authorized personnel to access the container. Fortunately, I've had 15 years' work around those limitations. As Emerson worked, Nima circulated the room, studying displayed documents and artifacts. A familiar symbol caught her attention, the same unusual markings from her father's compass, replicated on technical diagrams showing the initiator's internal structure. She found a journal entry displayed under glass, component sequencing critical for controlled field manipulation. The initiator must synchronize perfectly with the resonance pattern established during breach formation. Any deviation risks catastrophic oscillation. Another notation beneath read, genetic keying implemented as final safety measure. Only personnel with authorized biometric signatures can activate primary sequence. Nima's attention shifted back to Emerson, now working intently at the container's locking mechanism. Something about his focused determination triggered uncertainty. These security measures seem excessive for a simple fail-safe, Tenzin remarked, apparently sharing her suspicion. The initiator isn't simply a fail-safe, Emerson admitted without looking up. It's also the control mechanism that would allow directed manipulation of the breach. The original researchers feared its potential for weaponization if it fell into unauthorized hands. The final lock disengaged with an audible click. Emerson stepped back as the cylindrical container opened. sections rotating and separating to reveal a metallic object nestled within protective casing. Approximately the size of a large thermos, its surface featured intricate circuitry patterns that pulsed with faint blue luminescence, the same distinctive glow as the core. This is what my parents were trying to activate, Nima realized, recognizing components matching diagrams in her father's journal. Not to close the breach, but to control it, to create a stable passage. Emerson carefully lifted the initiator from its housing. Yes, their theory was sound, but the execution proved problematic. The power requirements exceeded their calculations, but with the current convergence amplifying available energy, Tenzin began. Exactly, Emerson's expression remained carefully neutral. The question is whether to use it for containment or for its original purpose. Another violent tremor shook the vault, stronger than previous ones. Display cases rattled, and a fine dust of disintegrating material floated down from the ceiling. "We're out of time for debate," Emerson said. "We need to reach the core chamber immediately." The journey back to the core chamber grew increasingly hazardous. Sections of the ship now exhibited alarming quantum instability, corridors stretching impossibly before returning to normal dimensions. Metal surfaces becoming temporarily insubstantial, gravity fluctuating unpredictably. They navigated carefully, Emerson leading with the initiator secured in a specialized carrying case. "The convergence is accelerating beyond all projected models," he noted, checking readings on a handheld device. "We're seeing energy patterns consistent with imminent boundary rupture." As they descended toward the lower levels, Nima's suspicions crystallized into certainty. Something in Emerson's manner had shifted, subtle changes in his expressions when discussing containment versus continuation of her parents' work. His concern seemed genuine, yet his eagerness to reach the core with the initiator suggested motivations beyond simple safety protocols. "Dr. Emerson," she said carefully as they paused at a security checkpoint, "you mentioned your superiors see military applications for the breach technology. Who exactly do you work for?" His hands stilled momentarily on the control panel. "Various research institutions fund our work. The Horizon Initiative encompasses multiple international partners. But someone specific sent you here alone," she pressed. "Someone expecting regular reports." Emerson's expression hardened slightly. "This isn't the time for administrative details. The quantum field destabilization is reaching critical thresholds." As if emphasizing his point, another violent tremor shook the ship. This one lasted nearly 30 seconds, metal groaning under impossible stresses as reality itself seemed to warp around them. When it sided, emergency lighting had activated, bathing the corridor in red warning illumination. They continued downward in tense silence. As they approached the final security door before the core chamber, Emerson reached into his pocket and removed what appeared to be a standard radio. Its design was notably different from his other equipment, military grade, with encryption markings Nima recognized from her father's descriptions of government hardware. "Base, this is Emerson," he spoke into the device, dropping all pretense. "I've secured the initiator and am proceeding to core implementation. Field collapse imminent. Recommend immediate evacuation of all monitoring stations within 20-kilometer radius." A staticky response came through. "Understood. Extraction team inbound to your location. Secure the artifacts and any viable subjects." Authority granted for Protocol Midnight. Tenzin moved slightly, positioning himself between Nima and Emerson. "Viable subjects." Emerson pocketed the radio, expression now coldly professional. "Individuals with demonstrated genetic compatibility for cross-dimensional transit." The ship's reaction to Nima confirms what we long suspected about your bloodline. The core responds to specific genetic markers we've spent decades trying to synthesize without success. "You never intended to close the breach," Nima realized. "You want to stabilize it, control it. Containment was always the contingency plan, not the objective." Emerson entered the final access code, the door to the core chamber sliding open. Your parents understood the potential. They weren't trying to close the breach either. They were attempting to create a stable passage, a permanent doorway between dimensions. For science, Tenzin's tone conveyed his disbelief. For whatever power controls such a doorway, Nima answered, pieces falling into place. Military applications, you said. Instantaneous deployment anywhere. Untraceable movement of materials or personnel. Emerson didn't deny it. The benefits outweigh the risks. Your parents saw this too before sentiment clouded their judgment. What happened to them? Nima demanded. The truth this time. Emerson hesitated, then shrugged as though the information no longer mattered. They discovered the genetic component was crucial for stable transit, that certain bloodlines could navigate the breach safely while others couldn't. When they realized the implications, they attempted to sabotage the project to ensure the breach could only be accessed through a failsafe they controlled. The compass, Nima whispered, a sophisticated quantum tether, yes. Tuned specifically to their genetic signature, and by extension yours, he gestured toward the core chamber. They initiated an unscheduled test, attempting to establish a stable passage using their own genetic markers as the key. The power requirements were miscalculated. The resulting surge created a partial breach that pulled them through but collapsed before proper stabilization. The core pulsed visibly through the open doorway, its blue glow now shot through with fractal patterns of white lightning. The chamber beyond had changed dramatically. Equipment floated free of moorings, energy discharges arced between surfaces, and the very air seemed to shimmer with potential. We don't have much time, Emerson stated, lifting the case containing the initiate. With the current convergence amplifying available energy, we can complete what they started, but I'll need your genetic signature to calibrate the final sequence. And if I refuse, Emerson removed a compact pistol from beneath his jacket. Then I extract the necessary genetic material by less pleasant means. The choice is yours. Tenzin moved suddenly, lunging for the weapon, but Emerson anticipated the action. A brief struggle ended with Tenzin clutching his arm. A tranquilizer dart embedded in his shoulder. He stumbled, fighting the sedative's effects. Run, he managed to tell Nima before collapsing. She didn't hesitate. Turning, she sprinted back up the corridor, the initiator's case clutched tightly against her chest, snatched during the momentary distraction of the struggle. Behind her, Emerson's voice echoed with cold fury. There's nowhere to go, Nima. The ship is sealed, and my team is inbound. You've only delayed the inevitable. Another tremor rocked the vessel, more violent than any before. Nima staggered but maintained her footing, continuing her desperate flight deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the impossible ship. Nima navigated the increasingly unstable corridors, quantum fluctuations warping reality around her. Sections of the ship phased between solid and transparent, gravity shifted unpredictably, and occasional objects passed through supposedly solid barriers. The vessel groaned like a living thing in pain, metal stress harmonizing with the rising pitch of energy discharges. She needed somewhere to hide, to think, to examine the initiator she'd stolen. Emerson would be searching methodically, and his reinforcements were inbound. The cargo entrance where they'd entered would undoubtedly be watched. A memory surfaced, the maintenance shaft where they'd hidden earlier. Small, easily overlooked, with access to the ventilation system. Nima changed direction, using her mental map of the ship's layout to navigate toward it. The ship shuddered violently. Nima braced against a wall that momentarily felt like liquid before resolidifying. The quantum distortions were worsening by the minute. She had to assume Tenzin was incapacitated, perhaps being used as bait. Her options were limited and diminishing rapidly. She reached the maintenance shaft and squeezed inside, pulling the access panel closed behind her. The narrow space offered minimal security, but would conceal her from casual observation. More importantly, it provided a moment to examine what she'd taken. The initiator's case was sophisticated, carbon fiber exterior with internal cushioning and what appeared to be quantum shielding. Latches opened smoothly, revealing the device nestled within custom-fitted housing. Its metallic surface featured circuitry patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the distant core, interconnected geometric shapes, forming a language of pure mathematics. Nima recognized elements from her father's compass and journal diagrams, recursive patterns that seemed to fold back into themselves, creating impossible dimensions within limited space. This was no simple machine, but something that existed partially outside conventional physics. Attached to the housing was a small data tablet. Nima activated it, finding detailed instructions for the initiator's operation. Her father's name appeared repeatedly in the documentation, alongside her mother's complex mathematical notation. This was truly their work, their vision, not merely a military project they'd joined. The tablet contained multiple implementation protocols: containment, stabilization, directed aperture, full manifestation. Each featured dire warnings about power requirements, field synchronization, and genetic authentication. The final protocol, labeled simply Horizon, was heavily encrypted, accessible only with specific biometric confirmation. Another violent tremor shook the ship. From her hiding place, Nima could hear distant voices, Emerson and others, conducting a systematic search. Time was running out. The initiator required proper interfacing with the core to function. She couldn't simply activate it from her current location. She needed to return to the core chamber, but Emerson would certainly be monitoring that area closely. A notification on the tablet caught her attention. Emergency protocol field collapse imminent. Below this warning, a simplified activation sequence appeared, designed for implementation under crisis conditions. It required minimal calibration, but offered only two options: complete shutdown or uncontrolled manifestation. Neither choice seemed ideal. Shutdown would strand her parents forever if they still lived somewhere beyond the breach. Uncontrolled manifestation risked expanding the dimensional tier beyond safe parameters, potentially endangering the entire region. There must be another option. Her parents wouldn't have designed this system without a middle path, a way to navigate between extremes. Nima carefully examined the initiator itself. Unlike the tablet with its digital interface, the device featured physical components, recessed panels, adjustable elements, connection ports. One section particularly drew her attention: a circular depression that matched the dimensions of her father's compass exactly. Understanding dawned. The compass wasn't merely a navigational tool or tether. It was a key component of the system, the missing piece that would allow for precise calibration. Her father had removed it deliberately, ensuring the initiator couldn't be fully activated without both the device and someone who understood its true purpose. She retrieved the compass from her pocket and tentatively placed it into the circular depression. It fit perfectly, edges aligning with microscopic precision. The instant connection completed, both the compass and initiator illuminated, with intensified blue light, patterns synchronizing into unified rhythm. The tablet interface changed, new options appearing, among them a protocol labeled Directed Retrieval, with her father's name attached as creator. This was it, the middle path. Not merely closing or expanding the breach, but focusing it specifically, creating a targeted connection to wherever her parents had been displaced. Nima had little time to consider further. Heavy footsteps approached her hiding place. She quickly closed the case, clutching it tightly as she retreated deeper into the maintenance shaft, finding a junction that allowed access to the ventilation system. As she crawled through the narrow ductwork, the ship's quantum distortions intensified. Metal surfaces around her occasionally became transparent, offering glimpses of corridors and compartments. Through one such momentary window, she saw Tenzin, conscious but restrained, being escorted by armed personnel in environmental suits. Another phasing revealed the exterior, the mountain landscape now illuminated by spectacular atmospheric phenomena. The aurora-like displays had expanded dramatically, visible energy cascading between sky and ship in brilliant ribbons of light. Even from within, she could see village lights in the distance. Her people would be witnessing this escalating phenomenon, perhaps already evacuating to safer ground. A final, powerful tremor forced Nima to brace herself within the confining ductwork. When it subsided, she found herself staring through another reality fluctuation, directly into the core chamber. The sphere pulsed with blinding intensity now, containment systems struggling to manage the escalating energy. Emerson stood at the control station, surrounded by newly arrived personnel, their frustration evident as they attempted system calibration without the initiator. It was now or never. Nima calculated her approach carefully. The ventilation system provided access to multiple chambers adjacent to the core room. Through momentary quantum fluctuations, she monitored Emerson's team, their frustration mounting as systems failed to respond without the initiator. They had positioned armed guards at all main entrances, but their attention focused on corridors and doorways, not maintenance access points. The ship's condition deteriorated rapidly. Structural integrity warnings echoed through communication systems. Emerson's team worked with increasing desperation, attempting manual core stabilization without success. Field collapse in 15 minutes. An automated voice announced. Complete quantum decoherence imminent. Nima identified her moment during a particularly violent tremor when attention diverted to stabilizing equipment. She emerged from a maintenance panel near the secondary control station, opposite where Emerson worked frantically. Before guards could react, she connected the initiator to its designated interface. Stop her! Emerson shouted, but another reality fluctuation temporarily separated them. The space between rippling like disturbed water. Nima's fingers moved swiftly across the interface, implementing the directed retrieval protocol. The initiator recognized her genetic signature instantly, confirming authentication without requiring additional verification. Its surface illuminated fully, geometric patterns pulsing in perfect synchronization with the core. The massive sphere responded immediately. Chaotic energy patterns resolving into organized, concentric rings, rotating at different velocities. The violent tremors subsided, replaced by a harmonious vibration that resonated throughout the chamber. Above the core, reality itself began to fold, creating a circular aperture approximately 2 meters in diameter. "What have you done?" Emerson demanded, struggling to reach her through the fluctuating space. "What my parents intended," Nima replied, watching the aperture stabilize, creating a controlled connection, not an unrestrained tear. The portal expanded slightly, its edges crystallizing into stable boundaries. Beyond the opening, indistinct shapes moved in swirling luminescence. The holographic projection Nima had seen earlier reappeared automatically, now displaying a coherent data stream rather than chaotic readings. Three-dimensional images formed in the projection, first showing the ship's original voyage, then its unexpected dimensional transit. The visualization continued with the vessel's appearance in the mountains decades later. The subsequent research expeditions, and finally, her parents' critical experiment 15 years prior. The projection revealed what truly happened, not a failed experiment, but a deliberate choice. When Emerson's superiors had demanded immediate militarization of the technology, overriding safety protocols, her parents had implemented an emergency alternative. They had used themselves as the anchor points for a controlled breach, taking the compass as both key and beacon. Their plan: establish connection from the other side when conditions allowed, creating a stable passage that they, not military interests, could control. They didn't miscalculate, Nima realized aloud. They sacrificed themselves to prevent weaponization. Naive idealism. Emerson spat, finally reaching the control station opposite hers. They condemned themselves to isolation between dimensions when they could have led the most significant scientific advancement in human history. They chose to be guardians rather than exploiters, Nima countered, maintaining her position as the portal continued stabilizing. The automated voice updated, quantum coherence established, dimensional alignment at 87%, and rise. Through the portal, The indistinct shapes became clearer. A landscape unlike Earth, yet hauntingly familiar. Crystalline formations rose like mountains beneath a sky of perpetual aurora. Among these structures, unmistakably human figures moved purposefully, apparently monitoring the growing connection from their side. 15 years, Tenzin murmured, having worked free during the confusion. He joined Nima at the control station. They've been building something there. The holographic projection shifted again, displaying mathematical models, explaining the dimensional relationship. This wasn't simply another location, but a space existing in quantum superposition with their own reality, a parallel dimension occupying the same coordinates in a different quantum state. The village legends, Nima whispered, the people who disappeared during strange storms over generations, they all went there. Dimensional alignment at 92%, the system announced. Stable transit corridor establishing. Emerson barked orders to his security team. Prepare for potential hostile entry. Weapons ready. Before his personnel could respond, the portal stabilized completely. Two figures stepped forward on the other side, becoming increasingly distinct as they approached the threshold. A man and woman, older but immediately recognizable to Nima, her parents alive and transformed by 15 years in another reality. They paused at the boundary, seemingly unable to cross without assistance. Her mother raised a hand, pressing it against an invisible barrier separating the dimensions. Her lips moved, forming words Nima couldn't hear, but somehow understood. The compass. Complete the circuit. Understanding instantly, Nima removed the compass from the initiator and held it toward the portal. The needle spun rapidly before pointing directly at her parents. Energy discharged between the compass and the portal's edge, creating a cascading reaction that rippled across the dimensional boundary. The barrier between worlds thinned visibly. Her parents' images solidified further, now clearly visible to everyone in the chamber. Behind them stood others, some recognizable as missing villagers, others unfamiliar but distinctly human. All watched the portal with expressions of hope and trepidation. My God, one of Emerson's scientists breathed. It's an entire colony. Dimensional alignment at 98%, the system reported. Passage integrity confirmed. Her father's voice finally penetrated the thinning barrier, distorted but understandable. Nima, you found us. The compass grew warm in her hand, pulsing with blue light that matched the portal's illumination. The final piece of her parents' plan, not merely creating a passage, but ensuring it could only be opened by someone who would use it wisely. By their daughter, the moment of connection stretched between them. Nima on one side of reality, her parents on the other, separated by a boundary grown thin but not yet permeable. 15 years of absence condensed into a single breathless exchange of recognition. We've been waiting, her mother called through the fluctuating barrier, monitoring the convergence cycles, preparing for when conditions would allow contact. The compass responded to your presence, her father added. Just as we designed it, blood calls to blood across dimensional boundaries. Emerson's security team had regrouped, weapons trained on the portal. Their leader awaited orders, clearly unsettled by this unprecedented development. Secure the girl and the initiator, Emerson commanded. Prepare for controlled exploration of the secondary dimension. Two guards moved toward Nima. Tenzin intercepted the first, using maintenance tools as improvised weapons. The second reached for Nima, but recoiled when the compass in her hand discharged a pulse of energy, not harmful but intensely disorienting. The passage responds only to specific genetic signatures, her mother called. A security measure we implemented. Without the correct biological markers, crossing causes molecular destabilization. Emerson's expression hardened. Convenient. You've created a dimensional gateway only your bloodline can safely use. A doorway that can't be weaponized, her father corrected. Knowledge without destruction. Through the portal, Nima glimpsed the world her parents had inhabited these 15 years. Crystalline structures housed what appeared to be a research settlement. Other humans moved about purposefully, some working with equipment, others tending to garden-like areas containing both familiar and alien vegetation. "We're not alone here," her mother explained, noting Nima's observation. "Others crossed during previous convergence cycles, some from our time, some from earlier periods, when the boundary thinned naturally. We've built a community dedicated to understanding the relationship between dimensions." Another violent tremor shook the ship. Warning lights flashed across control panels as automated systems announced, "Warning, dimensional alignment, exceeding safe parameters. Portal expansion imminent. What's happening?" Nima called to her parents. "The convergence is stronger than anticipated," her father replied. "The portal wants to expand beyond controlled parameters. We need to stabilize it from both sides simultaneously, or close it permanently," Emerson interjected, as was the original fail-safe design. Her father's expression grew grey. Closing it now would seal the boundary for generations, possibly centuries. All connection would be lost. "But the mountain would be safe," Emerson argued. "Your village protected from quantum displacement." The ship shuddered again, more violently. Structural integrity alarms blared as sections of the chamber began phasing between states of matter. "We need to decide quickly," her mother urged. "Nima, we can stabilize the connection, but you'll need to bring the initiator through to our side. The compass creates the bridge, but the initiator must anchor both ends. If she crosses, what guarantee do we have? You won't close the portal from your side?" Emerson demanded. "None," her father admitted. "That's the point. This technology cannot be controlled by military interests or governmental authorities. It must remain neutral, a bridge between worlds accessible only to those who would use it responsibly." Emerson gestured to his security team. "Secure the perimeter. No one approaches the portal." To his communications officer, "Advise headquarters that we're implementing containment protocol. Request immediate heavy support." The team's radio crackled with response. "Extraction helicopter inbound. ETA 4 minutes. Emerson turned to Nima, his expression calculated. "Consider carefully. Your parents abandoned you 15 years to pursue their ideological stance. They're offering you the same choice. Abandon your life, your village, your grandfather. For what? A crystalline other world and scientific principles." "They didn't abandon me," Nima replied quietly. "They protected everyone from people like you." Another alarm sounded. The portal's edges began fluctuating more dramatically, expanding in unpredictable pulses. "Dimensional containment failing," the system warned. "Uncontrolled expansion in 3 minutes. Nima, you must decide," her mother called urgently. "Bring the initiator through and we can stabilize the connection permanently, a controlled gateway between worlds. Or remain there and use the containment protocol to seal the breach." "There's a third option," her father added. "We've prepared for this moment. Look around you. What do you see on our side?" Nima studied the scene beyond the portal more carefully. Among the crystalline structures stood familiar figures, villagers who had disappeared over the years, including children she had known in her childhood. They had built not just a research station, but a community that mirrored their mountain home. "Everyone who disappeared," she whispered, "found their way here." "Yes," her mother confirmed. "When the boundary thinned naturally, they've joined our work, helping us understand and navigate between dimensions." The choice crystallized before her: remain in the world she knew, sealing her parents away forever, bring the initiator through alone, leaving her village and everything familiar behind, or attempt something more ambitious, more hopeful. "Tenzin," she said quietly, "the village needs to know. Whatever happens, they should understand the truth." He nodded, understanding her implicit request. The portal pulsed, expanding another few centimeters. Beyond it, her parents stood ready, hands extended toward the threshold that separated their world. 1 minute to uncontrolled expansion, the system warned. Emerson's radio crackled again. "Extraction team approaching ship coordinates. Stand by for arrival. Nima looked between the portal showing another world and reality. Her parents waiting, Tenzin beside her, Emerson and his team preparing to take control by force. The initiator hummed in her hands, responding to her genetic signature, awaiting her decision. The moment of choice had arrived. Decision crystallized into action. Nima pressed the compass into Tenzin's hand, their fingers briefly intertwining. "Tell my grandfather, I found them," she whispered. "Tell the village the truth about the ship, about everything." Understanding flashed in his eyes. "You're going through. I have to stabilize it from the other side," she confirmed. "It's what they've been preparing for. What I was born to complete." A mechanical whirring from above signaled the approaching helicopter. Emerson barked orders to his team: "Prepare for extraction. Secure the girl and the device. 30 seconds to uncontrolled expansion," the system warned. Nima turned to Tenzin. "Run. Get back to the village. The compass will guide you. It's attuned to our home just as it was attuned to my parents." He hesitated, torn between staying with her and fulfilling her request. The security team was advancing, weapons raised. There would be no second chance. "Go," Nima urged. With a final nod, Tenzin bolted for the maintenance access panel. Compass clutched tightly. 2 guards moved to pursue, but were diverted by Emerson's shout, "Forget him. Secure the girl and the initiator." Nima turned toward the portal where her parents waited. The passage between worlds pulsed with increasing instability, edges blurring as containment weakened. She raised the initiator, its surface patterns aligning with the portal's fluctuating geometry. "No!" Emerson lunged toward her, but too late. Nima stepped forward, initiator held before her like a key opening an impossible lock. The boundary between dimensions yielded, parting around her like water. For one breathless moment, she existed in both realities simultaneously. 1 foot in each world, the familiar ship behind, the crystalline landscape ahead. Then she was through, the initiator still clutched in her hands, her parents' arms encircling her in an embrace 15 years delayed. Behind her the portal contracted slightly, stabilizing as the initiator's presence on this side rebalanced the quantum equation. "You did it," her mother whispered, tears streaming freely. "You completed the bridge." Through the stabilized opening, Nima could see Emerson's fury as he realized what had happened. The initiator, now safely beyond his reach, responded to her parents' adjustments, interface panels reconfiguring as they implemented final calibration sequences. "Containment protocol engaged," her father announced. "Portal stabilization at 60% and rising." Beyond the portal, alarms continued blaring throughout the ship. The helicopter's shadow passed overhead, its downdraft visible as swirling currents in the unstable air above the vessel. "They'll try to force their way through," Nima warned. Her mother shook her head. "They can't. Without the genetic signature, molecular cohesion fails during transit. They would never survive the cross." As if to demonstrate this truth, one of Emerson's guards attempted to reach through the portal. His hand passed partially into the boundary before he recoiled in pain, skin blistering where it had contacted the dimensional threshold. "The passage recognizes bloodlines," her father explained, "those connected to this mountain, to its unique quantum signature. Generations of exposure created compatible genetic markers in certain families, ours among them." Emerson approached the boundary, careful not to touch it directly. "This isn't over," he called through. "We'll find another way to access your dimension." "Perhaps someday," her mother acknowledged. "When humanity is ready for such knowledge. But not as a weapon, not as a tool for domination. The bridge will remain, but protected." The initiator completed its calibration sequence. The portal contracted to a stable diameter, its edges crystallizing into permanent form. Through this window between worlds, Nima could see Emerson's team being evacuated as the ship's structural integrity continued deteriorating. "What happens to the ship?" she asked. "It served its purpose," her father answered. "The dimensional stresses will eventually return it to its origin point, empty, its mission complete." From this side of reality, Nima watched as Tenzin emerged from the cargo entrance, compass guiding his descent down the mountainside toward the village. He would carry her message, explain what had happened. Her grandfather would understand, perhaps had always understood what her destiny would be. Around her, the settlement's inhabitants gathered. Researchers, villagers, who had crossed in previous years, even children born in this crystalline world. A community bridging dimensions, preserving knowledge that humanity wasn't yet ready to possess fully. "There's so much to show you," her mother said, gently guiding her away from the portal. "We've been preparing for this day since we arrived." Nima glanced back once more at the world she'd left behind. Through the stabilized aperture, she could see the mountain landscape, the distant lights of her village, the familiar stars above. Not gone, just viewed from a different perspective now. Before turning away, she removed a small carved token from her pocket. A message stone used by villagers for centuries to communicate across mountain passes. She'd prepared it during the journey to the ship, inscribing her thoughts should she never return. With a gentle toss, she sent it through the portal, where it clattered on the ship's metal floor. Someday, someone would find it. Her grandfather, perhaps, or future explorers, after the ship had settled into its final configuration. The message was simple, carved in traditional script: 2 worlds, 1 family. The bridge remains for those who seek wisdom, not power. Look to the mountains when the lights dance in the sky. I am well, I am home. As Nima walked toward the crystalline community with her parents, the ship behind her began its final transformation, not ending, but evolving into something that would connect worlds for generations to come.